We're starting a little late. We will extend a little late. We can go a little bit further. We're still waiting for one witness, but I think as we proceed, the video conference witness will come on board with us. So I call this meeting to order. So I'd like to welcome you all to meeting number 39 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee is resuming its consideration of Bill 2C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. So we have today two panels of witnesses, one panel of 3 witnesses per hour. So in the first hour, we will have, by video conference, we will have the Centre Culturel Islamique du Québec, Bourfeda Benabdallah, spokesperson, and we'll give them an opportunity to make their statement when they join us. And with us today in person, we have from Danforth Families for Safe Communities, we have Ali Demarcan, Ken Price, and Claire Smith. Thank you. And from One by One Movement, Inc., we have Marcel Wilson, founder, and Savino Griesi, Chief Executive Officer. So with that, we will have each group will have an opportunity to give 5 minutes of opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. So we will start with Mr. Price, Ms. Smith, and Mr. Demarcan. Go ahead, please, 5 minutes.
Chair, is the mic on, or do I need to? Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm Ken Price, and let me introduce Claire Smith and Ali Demarcan. We represent Danforth Families for Safe Communities. We're based in Toronto. We experienced terror and tragedy from gun violence on a horrific night on July 22nd, 2018. It was a handgun that came to a retailer in one part of the country that was stolen and then used in Toronto to kill a girl, a teenager, and 13 others that night. One of those injured was Ali, and another was my daughter, Samantha, and the daughter of Claire and I. It is through this lens of that experience therefore, and through our own subsequent findings as a grassroots group that emerged from that night, that we have joined others in calling for a need for action to reduce the growing gun violence problem. We're not here to be critical of all gun owners or of all gun ownership. Our group is made up of citizens with various levels of experience and use of firearms. But since we were brought into this issue due to the tragedy, we are troubled that gun violence and homicides by gun have continued to grow. And we also agree that no one measure will be sufficient to combat this issue. We support Bill C-21 because it is a wide-reaching bill, and it has many aspects. It's not just about a freeze on handguns or a buyback of assault rifles. It has a number of items that we support. But other groups are going to talk about other measures and have given testimony in that regard. So we are going to focus on what has been called the freeze on handguns and that aspect of it, and the efforts to reduce the widely held private supply of handguns that we believe are contributing to crime in this country. It gives us no pleasure to make that statement. It gives us no pleasure to stand here and say that the domestic source of legally imported and licensed guns contributes to a significant portion of guns used in homicides and violence. But as evidence, of course, we have our own experience, and our own experience where this was true. And then through a survey of accredited news sources, we've compiled a list of incidents where handguns were stolen, diverted, their straw purchases occurred, or licensed gun owners themselves were the ones carrying out the violence. So we combine this anecdotal and incidental information with our reading of Statistics Canada data. And for those guns, according to Statistics Canada reporting, for those guns that were successfully traced and used in a homicide, the number of guns traced to Canada were 2.5 times greater than the guns traced to the United States. Now, we realize that this number is likely to be challenged, and it is different that other people are socializing. StatsCan also reports that the gun format that's primarily used in crime is the handgun. So it's not about all guns, and we're not taking issue with the vast majority of gun owners who own rifles and shotguns. We are taking issue with the fact that handguns themselves are the problem. Now, of course, we also conclude that there's an issue with guns coming across the border. We absolutely acknowledge, we know that. We've talked to lots of groups that will acknowledge that as well. But we're here to say that there's not one problem to solve where supply is concerned. There's two problems to solve. And therefore, the freeze is necessary, unfortunately. And in that regard, we have three comments that we'd like to make about what has been proposed. The first, and all of these lead to some clarification and perhaps tightening of some of the exemptions, which I think are well-meaning but could lead to an undermining of the goal of freezing and reducing the number of handguns in the country. First is the exemption for elite sport shooters. We think the wording needs to be clarified and tightened so that it is more clear that it's really the pistols being used in those competitions and not a general license for handgun ownership. And we also ask that the program that is being supported is that which exists today. Related to this point, we're already seeing that other sports shooting organizations are coming forward and saying, well, what about us? You know, IPSC is an example of that. And our concern is that those other organizations have very broad definition with respect to how many and what kinds of handguns they can use. They have an open category, so virtually any handgun could qualify. So we're concerned, again, that it would undermine the objective of the bill, which is to freeze and reduce the handgun supply in Canada. Secondly, we'd like to see a loophole closed that existed in our case where the person who had stolen a gun was able to buy magazines, particularly, without having the need to present that they had an RPAL or a PAL and an ability to buy that. So we would like to see that wherever a license is required to buy a gun or ammunition, that so too the magazine is included in that. And third, there have been suggestions made that perhaps the gun ranges themselves could get the business exemption. We understand that idea, although we're very concerned. We have seen evidence that gun ranges can be a target of theft, and therefore we're opposed to this ownership model until or if regulations are agreed to that would ensure the safety of all Canadians should that go forward. We shouldn't back into that as an idea. It should be an idea that we construct. So, Mr. Chair, thank you to all the MPs on this committee for your service. Maybe as Canadians we don't say that enough to our MPs. Thank you for your attention to this complex and difficult issue, and thank you for letting us make these statements today.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Wilson to make an opening statement. 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'm honored to be here. More so, I'm honored to speak on behalf of the people and the communities that the One by One movement serves, ensuring that their voices are amplified. I've had the privilege to speak as a subject matter expert on gang culture, theory, and violence prevention at a number of roundtables and events on the impacts of violence, gun violence in particular. Today, I'm going to speak to you less formally than I normally would. Today, I'm going to speak to you from the heart, simply as a human being, as a person with lived experience, as a proud Canadian. Participating in these roundtables, I consistently hear statistics and reports about people who live and face a great deal of violence daily. Yet, in these settings, I rarely hear from people who are firsthand experiencing the majority of gun violence, and I feel that this is one of the reasons we are not seeing the progress we should in combating this issue. I see and hear people making a living and a name for themselves, speaking on behalf of people and the communities that they don't really know or understand for personal gain or political leverage. Some may think that's what I'm doing now, but there's a big difference between them and I. We're not the same. As many of you know, I'm a former gang member and organized crime figure in Canada and abroad. But before I was ever involved in a life of crime, I was a victim, a survivor of gun violence on a number of occasions. And I'd like to start by sharing with you a short story of the first encounter I've had involving a firearm. I was about 11 years old, playing outside with a group of friends in the southwest end of Toronto, in a Toronto public housing complex called Swansea Mews. There were a group of older guys from my neighborhood that were involved in bad things. Some of them relentlessly bullied us kids and terrorized the community. Though we were children, we had to learn to navigate and cope the best we could with this. On this day, a known gunman that hung out in my area decided he was going to fire shots at us kids above our heads just to see us run. I remember hearing the zing of bullets passing us. This was entertaining to him, because when I look back as I was running for my life, I remembered seeing him laugh. I'll never forget this day. And now, as an adult, I can look back and isolate and identify. This is one of the many root cause risk factors that helped to lead me down a path of self-destruction. I tell you this story because when I think about this incident and this individual, at the time, if Bill C-21 had existed or a bill like it, would it have prevented this traumatizing experience from happening to me? I strongly say that it would not. It would not have changed anything, because I'm confident he did not use a legal firearm to shoot at us that day. This man was not a citizen of Canada. He was a hardened criminal and most definitely could not have acquired a license to legally own a gun here. Also, I'd like to tell you about a best friend of mine who was a highly respected gangster at one point in his life. His name was Durgan Cisse. After a life of crime and the many traumas he was left with due to the terrible things, the violent acts he committed, and the violence he himself endured, he sadly took his own life. I remember speaking to him the day leading up to it. He was extremely down and didn't believe that he could or was good enough to get back up again. He had made his decision and he was motivated. I wish that he was able to get the help that he needed before it had gotten as bad as it did. He did not use a firearm to take his life. The reason I told these stories is to really drive home the point that we are wasting precious time focusing on the wrong things. Through decades of data collection, we have all learned what most of the root cause risk factors are that lead society on a path of extreme violence. Let us focus on the cheaper, most logical solutions, and that is prevention. Let us get these illegal guns off our streets and treat our less fortunate better. Let us focus more on the demand and less on the supply. I'm tired, and we are tired. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our other witness from the Centre Culturel Islamique de Quebec has joined us. I'll ask the clerk to briefly do a sound check, and then we'll continue with the statement. Go ahead.
Monsieur Ben Abdallah, vous êtes en ligne?
Are you there? Are you online, Mr. Ben Abdallah? Are you online? Yes, hello. Just a couple of words, please, for the benefit of our interpreters and the sound checks. How are you? Yes, I can hear you clearly, loud and clear. Please proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak, despite my delay in logging in. Of course, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to new technologies. Now, that said, I do have a speech to read, which includes all of my ideas that I'd like to communicate. And for the past 5 years, I've been involved in the Quebec Mosque that has been subject to the scourge of gun violence, handguns. So allow me to speak from the heart and propose a number of recommendations with the hope that this will help in combating violence through using firearms. We need to do this for ourselves, for our families, for our universities, for our schools. Canada must continue to be a non-violent people, to be able to live in safety and peace. The gun attack on the Quebec City Mosque was a turning point in our existence as a society on Canadian soil. The killer, who took advantage of his right to legally purchase firearms, that is, handguns and assault weapons, did not hesitate to enter a place of worship and coldly murder 6 fathers, seriously wounded 5 others, one of whom is now a paraplegic, who still has a bullet in his neck that health authorities were not able to remove, having received 6 bullets in his body, one of which is still lodged, as I said, in his cervical vertebrae, and traumatised several dozen people who were present at the end of their last prayer of the day. Moreover, it is the entire population of Quebec and Canada that was hurt, injured, wounded by this thoughtless act, emboldened by the sense of power that can come from bearing an arm. The attack was not the only one. This sense of power leads to thoughtless acts. This attack was not the only one. We all agree that there were others, such as Polytechnique, 14 young girls who could have been builders, pioneers in our society, the Dawson College, Porte-Pic, and unfortunately the list goes on and on. Should we be pessimistic in the face of this? Yes, we should. But in the same breath, we must remain open to the possibility of putting in place regulations, awareness building, in order to combat this atrocity, which is the possession of firearms. We, the mosques, were extremely glad and grateful to have had the opportunity to see the introduction of Bill C-21 on May 30th of this year. Historic. We are honoured to have played a role in this significant and historic victory for public safety, our great country, Canada. For 5 long years, we have advocated for a ban on handguns, because it is these very weapons that cause the tragedy in our mosque. In the space of 2 minutes, 120 seconds, 6 fathers, 17 orphans, 5 wounded, and Canadians and Quebecers shaken to the heart. That cannot happen in Canada. This cannot happen in Quebec, and yet it did. Minister Mengetino, whom we commend for his sincerity and dedication, delivered what Canadians sought: a ban on new handguns and a phasing out of existing weapons. I'm not teaching you anything new here, but we must commend him. We celebrated by calling on Canadians to communicate their support to their elected officials, municipal, provincial and federal, involved in this right. We are fully aware that the gun lobby will fight this bill tooth and nail. The imminent passage of Bill C-21 will put an end to this lobby's efforts and, most importantly, will contribute to peace on our streets, in our schools and in our homes. As we have said in many fora, in the media, to the elected officials who have visited the Quebec Mosque on many occasions, including our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, our Ministers, the Honourable Marco Mendicino, the Honourable David Lametti, the Honourable Ahmed Hussein, the Honourable Omar Al-Gabra, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, and the Members of Parliament who have worked closely with us, Ms. Rachel Bandayen and Joel Lightbound. We would like to remind you today of our 10-point proposal. We will reiterate it, we will repeat it, and call on you again to listen to us, to please listen to us, and to convince other parties to work hand in hand to put an end to this. Here are the 10 proposals that I'd like to bring forward as a member of this combined effort to fight firearms. 1. Amend Bill C-21 as promised by the Minister when this bill was introduced to enshrine a comprehensive and permanent definition of prohibited weapons to cover all semi-automatic military-type weapons that are not reasonably used for hunting. We do not need war weapons. They are war weapons. I was a child born in the Algerian Revolution. I've seen war weapons traumatize my parents, and I am still traumatized. We don't need them on Canadian soil, these war weapons. Second, ensure a wall-to-wall ban on the movement, sale... I'm sorry to cut you off, sir.
We have to cut it off there. I hope those points are in your brief.
D'accord.
And
Yes, I see.
to see it from there. Sorry,
Exact.
but we have to have
Indeed.
questions. Thank you for joining us, and I recognize we had some issues with video conferencing, and thanks for bearing with us. So we'll go now to our first round of questions. We'll start with Ms. Dancho. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very sincerely to all the witnesses for being here today. We greatly appreciate your candid testimony and sharing with the committee your thoughts on this bill and the country's approach to dealing with gun violence in general. And on behalf of the Conservative Party, we are deeply sorry for the loss that you've experienced in your life as a result of violent crime and gun violence. And I've worked with this committee for a while now, and although, of course, I think we have different approaches by party of how to solve this, I can say quite confidently that we all take this very seriously, and we want to see an end to gun violence in Canada, and we are working very hard to achieve that. I will start my questions with Mr. Wilson and his colleague. Thank you for both being here. It's an honor to finally meet you in person, and thank you for your contributions to many studies that we've had at Public Safety Committee. Mr. Wilson, when you were here last February contributing to our Guns and Gangs study, you mentioned, I'm just going to quote you, when speaking on gun control, and when we hear the phrase, it should always be synonymous with illegal gun crime and illegal gun trafficking, as over 80% of the gun violence we are witnessing is committed with illegal firearms smuggled in from the U.S. Now, you mentioned in your opening testimony that you experienced a life of crime for quite some time. Can you elaborate on that comment? How do criminals who commit gun violence, where do they get these guns from? Why do they have them? Can you just elaborate on that for the committee?
Unfortunately, at one point in my life, I was a person who was involved with importing and exporting at some level firearms into this country. And, you know, now I look at what's happening in our communities and how easily accessible they are to very young children. And I know for a fact that most of the guns that are used now are guns that are being imported. How do I know this? Because we work directly in communities with a lot of the gang-involved youth. And because of my background and my history, they speak a lot more openly with us than they would with you or law enforcement or other people. So we do a lot of poking around. We do a lot of inquiring with these young guys. And they speak openly with us. So we know, you know, maybe not the direct source, but we've challenged kids. We've had media come to us in one case to see how quickly we could resource a weapon. And it was under 2 hours. And this was by a 17-year-old boy.
So under 2 hours in certain parts of that you're talking about Toronto, you can source an illegally obtained weapon. So anyone with any criminal background could get a handgun, a legal handgun, within 2 hours. That's what you're, okay.
Within 2
And
hours.
you have had a remarkable story with the One by One movement. You completely turned around your life, and you're really saving lives and pulling people out from a life of crime. So thank you for your contribution to society in that way. We need many more Marcel Wilsons and your colleagues across the country in all of our major cities. So it's that easy to obtain an illegal weapon. How do we as policymakers, how can we possibly go about tackling that issue? How do we stop that from happening?
We've spoken quite a bit on really taking having an acute focus on the root cause risk factors, you know, the motivations behind why a child or a person would even want to pick up a gun, you know, and if we can tackle that issue, then we can focus a lot less on the tools of destruction. I mean, for myself, you know, I had experiences and certain things that happened to me that led me up, that built me up to wanting to react. I was angry due to certain social issues that were going on in my neighborhood. I was angry that I grew up in I guess what would be considered an impoverished neighborhood, and had to see, you know, the fancy houses and condominiums right across the street from me, and wondered why I couldn't have or acquire these things. So there are so many layers to the before a murder happens that I think we need to really invest in, opposed to focusing on the tool itself.
So attacking the root problems of poverty and crime and investing our resources there. Would you say that the gun trafficking is related to drug trafficking at all?
They're directly linked, absolutely.
Are firearms used sort of defend drug turf and enforce sort of gang rules? Is that what they're used for?
100%. 100%.
Thank you. And so when we're looking at Bill C-21, it does many things, but one of them is to focus on freezing any new legal, lawfully owned firearm ownership of handguns. Currently we have trained, tested, and vetted people who go through a very rigorous process can get a restricted license and purchase a handgun. So it's focusing on those individuals. So do you think that focusing on those individuals will have any impact on what you're seeing in Toronto with the gang elements with guns? Like, how do you see this bill meeting that need at all?
Well, from my direct experience, I don't recall ever there being a time that we had resourced any gun legally, and any of the guns that may have been from a legal source was due to a robbery or them being taken. But that was also a very rare occurrence. So I don't see how in any way, and I mean, before I've come here, I've spoken to our youth. I've spoken to guys that are currently in prison, and we always pose the question, do you think something like this would help us? You know, banning of any type of legal firearm, and the answer is 100% always the same. You know, we've never used legal firearms or sought out to. You know, it was much easier to get them illegally.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We'll go now to Mr. Van Bynen. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank our witnesses for arriving today. I just can't imagine the horrible tragedy that many of you have experienced, and I extend my condolences to you for very sad experiences in your life. I think that prevention needs to be a priority, and outreach is critical, as we've heard earlier. We've let me just see, the National Crime Prevention Strategy has arranged $665 million to support 684 crime prevention interventions. And I'm wondering, have you been able to access any of those crime prevention funds at all? And that question would be for Mr. Wilson. As part of your program, have you been able to access any of the crime prevention funding?
Thank you for the question. We have been at tables where funding was talked about. Mm-hmm. We have been on consultation roundtables and spoken about this money, but as to date, we have yet to receive any funding.
So to me, the question then is has the government not been reaching out to organizations such as yourself to indicate to you the application process, or have you just been providing advice and not receiving any support on any of your programs? Is that correct?
They have reached out, and we have spoken to them, but we, I guess for lack of better terms, have sort of been through the gambit as far as understanding and learning the process of how to acquire funds or receive funding here, mm-hmm. which is one of the issues that we've identified as one of the root cause issues that organizations that are doing the real work that may not be well versed in the application processes, the language are a lot of the times left out because the process is very rigorous.
So we could do a better job in letting organizations know that funding is available and to provide access. I'm interested in your programs. You have two focuses, as I understand it. The first one is the outreach for is it ages 6 to 29?
Yes.
How do you find people who are at risk of offending, and how do you get them engaged for that specific group?
So what I think makes us niche is that our background. So it's very difficult, as I understand it, for government bodies and social workers to have direct contact with at-risk or high-risk component. Mm-hmm. A lot of the youth that we see participating in programs are guys that we wouldn't really consider high risk. They may live in marginalized communities, so they're actually actively seeking, assistance or help. But the ones that need the most help, there's a lack of trust between government and community. Mm-hmm. So because of our background and connection with a lot of these guys and reputation, they feel a lot more comfortable speaking to people like us in those settings.
Is there a national organization that the government could reach out to help educate and provide the process to?
Yes, the One by One movement.
Okay, great. The next item is the concern about recidivism. And I think a quote from you is that we'd like to think of ourselves as ambassadors for change unprompted by the threat of punishment. Can you tell me how that works? I think the term that you've used is the IRTP, or the Internal Realization Transformation Process. How does that work? And how effective has that been in relation to other programs?
It's been quite effective, actually. We have a program specifically designed for those that are incarcerated, and then we have a program that is tailor-made for those that are either on the verge or just coming out. And one of our very first steps is guiding these young guys that trust us through the internal realization and transformation process. So these are indicating the positive factors that can contribute to realigning them with society. And once, once they feel open enough and confident to speak with you, you'll find that, there are a lot of parallels, there are a lot of things that we relate on. And once they're open to that, we've had a lot of success as far as breaking the trust barrier and them being more open to following a path because they see people who have done it doing it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Price, I'd like to direct my next question to you and the organization that you've been able to put together. And you should be proud of the way you're doing something positive with such a terrible experience. I congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
In the Danforth Family's Safe Communities Statement on the 4th anniversary of the Danforth shooting, it states, "From the facts of our case, we advocate for actions that can be taken by all levels of government to reduce the risk of death by guns." Can you expand on this, and do you have a specific recommendation that would help this committee provide or improve the effectiveness of Bill C-21?
Well, I think beyond the statement, I do want to congratulate Mr. Wilson and his work. And we have tried to reach out and become more educated about the issue. I will say that we were not educated about this issue before this incident came into our lives. It's shocking when it happens. And I also thank the support I have of my lovely wife and my friend Allie and the other members of the Danforth communities. It's not just me that's making these statements. But I want to say that it would be wrong for this committee to conclude that we only have one issue. It's not one kind of gun violence. In fact, I think in the past we've agreed on this, that frankly there are different kinds of gun violence and different remedies that are going to be required. According to Statistics Canada, only half of the gun violence activity is attributed to gangs and guns. So frankly, if we deal with this, and we should, and there are issues related to importation and smuggling, and we need to fund these communities better. We completely agree with that. But then to ignore the other half of the problem would ignore the problem that happened to us, that happened to the mosque. There are other shooters that take motivation and have different access to weapons. So our recommendation is to not lose that focus. This bill needs to be balanced. We think this is a balanced bill, and maybe it can be tweaked and improved to make other people happy, but it needs to cover all of the things that it's covering. It needs to cover the freeze, it needs to deal with assault-style weapons, it needs to deal with the borders, it needs to fund communities, it needs to make it easier for women or others who are feeling threatened by gun owners to report, and all of that work needs to be done. But that is the scope of the problem. It's not one problem, it's not one group, it's not one set of... thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On y va maintenant.
We'll now proceed with Ms. Michaud. 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the witnesses for being in attendance today. It's greatly appreciated. On part of my political party, I'd like to express my condolences to all of those who've been affected by handgun and gun violence. Your experience is very important to us. Mr. Benandala, thank you very much for agreeing to appear before us today. I'm sorry you weren't able to log in earlier. I do have a number of questions for you. You spoke about the announcement of the 30th of May when the government introduced Bill C-21 and you supported the introduction of that bill. I know the number of groups backed the government's initiative at the time because Minister Machino and the government made promises that they would amend the legislation to prohibit assault-style weapons as well. And in the first iteration of the bill, it is not there, that amendment. And I know that that was one of the prerequisites for support on the part of a number of groups who were intending to back that legislation. Did that happen to you too? Did the government promise that they would make that amendment to the legislation? And are you confident that the government will keep its promise, despite the fact that on a number of occasions the government doesn't seem to be moving ahead with this, and yet they seem to want to amend the criminal code and have a wall-to-wall ban on handguns and plug all the loopholes that currently exist, but they haven't proceeded in that manner. And the same is true of the buyback program. Are you confident the Liberals will bring that amendment to bear in short order? You're on mute, sir. Your microphone, please, Mr. Bendala. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Michaud, and your questions are opportune. These are 2 points that we have made in our 10 recommendations that I am making on behalf of the Quebec City Mosque. That is a wall-to-wall ban of semi-automatic assault-style weapons, and to fast-track this process as quickly as possible. We want, and we reiterate, and you're aware of this, that we agree entirely that the government needs to proceed in this manner. And I do remain optimistic and confident. We discussed this in person, Mr. Minister Mendicino and myself, when he visited the Quebec City Mosque. Now, had this perpetrator had a semi-automatic weapon, he would have created even more hurt and pain. So this needs to proceed, and we are going to write to the minister again to remind him of his promise. Thank you very much, Mr. Ben Dabala. You can rest assured that the Bloc Québécois will push for this amendment, even if the Liberal Party does not. In fact, it was your first recommendation, a prohibition of assault-style weapons. You didn't have an opportunity to speak to your other recommendations, so please go ahead if you'd like to list them. Well, there are a number of other recommendations that Mr. Wilson supports as part of a preventative framework, but we don't think that the government is going far enough. The onus is on the government to put in place tough prevention programs that have teeth with organisations that have the wherewithal to carry this out. Now, preventing an ounce of prevention is worth 2 ounces of harm, as we know, as the dicton goes. So that is my 5th point. We need to train police officers. One need only reflect on the Portapique tragedy. And there needs to be greater public awareness campaigns. I'm not an expert when it comes to speaking to the public, but advertisements that state that these weapons in circulation are highly dangerous and that our children and youth need to be vigilant. I don't know how to communicate that message, but there needs to be outreach, awareness building in schools, in colleges, in the CEGEPs, in the universities. This needs to be the subject of debate, and there needs to be awareness-building programs with communication specialists, psychologists who specialise in this kind of thing, so there's no confusion whatsoever. So there are a couple of points that I wanted to make among my 10 recommendations. Now, there's another recommendation, and that is no exemptions of these new businesses that engage in war games, for example. You know, they say that they want to become an Olympic sport, and yet Olympic sports are very clearly defined. This legislation must not allow exemptions other than for international athletes as part of the Olympic Games and other businesses that are greedy for profit by promoting these new war games should be not be subject to an exemption, because that will just open the door to other businesses following suit, and it'll be a slippery slope. And Bill C-31 will lose its teeth because businesses will be in a position to dictate what they want to do. So Bill C-21 has to be tight enough to prevent any exceptions aside from Olympic Games participation. So there you have it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. That was kind of you. Thank you. My time has run out indeed.
Go now to Mr. McGregor. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to first of all thank all of our witnesses for coming before our committee, sharing your stories. And I think I'd just start off with a comment. I think it's quite remarkable that we have two groups of witnesses here who have both been touched by gun violence and exposure to firearms in their own ways in the same city, and are coming forward before our committee with different approaches. And I think now you're getting a sense of the challenge that's before us as policymakers as we're dealing with this delicate issue. So thank you for having the courage to come before us to share your stories. I know it's not easy, and in many times you can be reliving the trauma of the lived experience when you're recounting it to us. So I just want you to know that we as a committee do appreciate that, and we are certainly taking all of your testimony under advisement. Mr. Wilson, I would like to start with you. I agree with you that there's no one silver bullet to addressing the very complex problem of gun violence, and it takes different forms in different parts of the country. I do think there is room for some legislative aspects in approaching this problem, and C-21 is not just about a handgun freeze, right? There are provisions in the bill which address tougher penalties for a variety of firearms offenses. There's a considerable section of the bill that deals with emergency prohibition orders, the yellow flag, red flag. You must have, across your lived experiences, come across situations where there's been domestic violence in the home, where a firearm has been present. Do you have any comments on the part of C-21 which is providing more legislative authority for someone to approach a judge, remain anonymous, and to get an emergency prohibition order to remove firearms from the home? Do you think that legislative part of C-21 has value? Do you have any comments to help inform our committee as we're studying those particular clauses?
Absolutely. I think we have a serious mental health crisis here happening in the country, and especially in my communities, marginalized communities, it's actually taboo to speak on the subject. And I think in this particular case, I grew up in the areas I grew up in. I witnessed quite a bit of domestic violence in some cases where there were firearms involved. And my answer sort of stays the same as far as I believed if this person had some type of intervention or preventative measures, if we invested more in our mental health programs and having more access to them, being better able to identify when somebody is in crisis and responding to that, I think that would be more poignant as a solution than again focusing on how we take the weapon away from a person, because I know this from experience. You can take away the weapon, but if the motivation is still there, a person who is motivated enough will find a way. Mm-hmm. So let's focus on the motivation.
Mm-hmm. Do you, I guess more broadly speaking, are there any areas in tackling gun violence that you do see where legislative solutions could assist with the efforts that you're doing on the ground? Absolutely.
A stronger focus on the illegal weapons that are circulating in our streets, a focus on our borders and investing there, along with investing in grassroots communities. So when we talk about this multifocal approach, we are absolutely talking about investing in law enforcement, investing in grassroots, investing in our mental health service providers, investing in our education systems, and working collectively. But again, as far as focusing on any weapon, a person who's motivated enough will find a way.
Mr. Price, I'd like to turn to you with respect to the handgun freeze. I've met with a number of constituents and also in neighboring ridings who are involved in sport shooting disciplines. And they have been pleading with me and other members of Parliament to try and keep their sport alive somehow. And I understand your concerns with the exemptions, but do you not think that there's a way that we can find a compromise in this where we allow those who are so passionate about their sports to continue in some way and maybe try to attach further legislative restrictions so that we're trying to take into account your very real concerns about the domestic diversion, but also paying attention to a sport that many are extremely passionate about practicing. This is one of the challenges we're facing.
No, it is a great challenge. But I do like the fact that you've expanded the discussion again, because it's not one thing. It's not one person's or one group's experience. It's all of our experience collectively, and you're going to have the unenviable task of sorting through what at the end of the day you're going to prioritize. But I think, we're going to have to change something, to have a better public safety outcome. The United Kingdom, I know, here we go. Here goes the guy with England again. But United Kingdom, America, Canada, kind of in the middle. But we're allowing 50,000 more handguns a year or so since about 2015, more and more and more people taking interest, and correlated or coincidental, more gun violence. And then you sort through it, and for the imperfect data sources that we have, you've got an attribution that sometimes, a lot of times, this comes from Canadian sources, and sometimes, and a lot of times, it comes from illegal sources, that half the time it's gun and gang related and half the time it isn't. And you have groups here that represent that. And I think you have to take all of that into account. I would say to folks that are interested in sports shooting, first of all, there are like 10 million rifles out there still after this is over, and 1 million handguns still in use, and that those sports shooters could choose to enter rifle competitions. I don't want to tell them what to do or be telling them what to do, but what I'm asking them to do is to give something up so that we can have safer streets. That's my message.
Thank you. That's your time, Mr. McGregor. We'll go now to we'll start our second round. We're not going to have time for a full second round, so we'll have one question slot per party. We will go to Mr. Motz for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And again, as has been echoed, thank you for your witnesses, all the witnesses, for being here and sharing your life experience. I'm an appel and an RPEL holder. As Mr. Chang, I have over 3 decades in law enforcement. I come from a different perspective as well. But we all are after public safety. That's really what we're after here. And I appreciate your comments, Mr. Price, on we have to look at all the experiences collectively. But I look at the value for dollar. So the government wants to look at, up to, they haven't given us a number, but, industry experts are saying it could cost $5 billion to confiscate what's being already on the books that they want to redo. And Mr. Wilson, I want to go to you first. Your program is exceptional. And I would like you as a group to submit, if you can, a brief to the highlights of what your group is about and how you accomplish your tasks and the success rates you've had. I think that'd be very important for our community to have. The government has sprayed around money for on public safety and crime prevention for decades. It was successive governments, and it has now been successful. Why is it that a program like yours can be successful and doesn't get the funding you need, and other programs who may be louder voices get big money, but they do nothing? Like, why the disconnect?
Thank you for the question. One of the fundamental flaws that we see is the application process itself. A lot of the people who can do the most effective work in the most affected communities may not be educated and have, in writing a grant or understanding the language. And then from what we understand, at least in Ontario or in Toronto, when applying for a grant or something along those lines, it goes through an algorithm. So an algorithm that looks for key phrases and keywords before it ever hits a human eyes. So if you can't speak the language, where many of the most effective groups that we've encountered cannot, unfortunately, they're never heard. And I'm speculating here, but I mean, a lot of the times it seems that the squeaky wheel kind of gets the worm, where organizations that may have name capital for whatever reason tend to receive a lot of the funding, and I think maybe it's comfortable for a lot of people who make the decisions as to where that money's going.
Right. So $5 billion, could go a long way on programs that are multifaceted across many spectrums. We can tighten our borders. We can, deal with the revolving justice system that, we have criminals who continue to commit offenses over and over again while they're out on bail. And we can get programs like yours who, and similar other ones across the country, who actually can get some funding and get some results. I guess one of my concerns is I look at this bill, and as I listen to millions of, the feedback of Canadians like myself, millions of them, we don't see any positive outcome that's being proposed that's going to play out to have an actual impact on public safety. It really will not. The targeting of licensed firearm owners who are lawfully vetted, who do not pose a threat. As a PAL and RPAL owner, I am 3 to 5 times less likely to commit an offense than anybody else in this room who is not one. Not criminals, the average Canadian. So to target those people, Mr. Wilson, seems to be that we are misguided in our approach. You've said it. I've heard from gang members myself, as I'm sure Mr. Chang has. They don't follow the rules. They don't follow the law already. So more laws on top of existing laws that already aren't being followed are not going to keep us safer. What do you say to something like that? How do we actually, besides your program and programs like it, how do we have a positive impact on public safety that we can all go in the same direction on? And because right now we're not.
Well, especially when it comes to recidivism, there's a young man that I work with who was gang involved for quite some time. He had done quite a bit of federal prison time, and having a conversation with him one day, very articulate young man, he expressed his disappointment, and you'd think this is a guy who's done some pretty horrific things, but while he was incarcerated, had time with his thoughts and became bored, he was very interested in things like violence prevention, and that the VVP, the current VVP within CSC, was a booklet this thick. So focusing on violence prevention programs while inside, catching young people while they're very young, having the education systems. Again, we have this kind of siloed things that are happening, at least in our province.
Could you wrap it up in 10 seconds, please?
Where we're not working together. We need to work together more and with a focused attention on prevention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Mr. Chang. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today and taking time out of your busy schedule to help us in getting this work done. Personally, in regards to the Danforth shooting, I have connection to that because Juliana Korzik and my niece were on the same swim team. And I met you, Mr. Price, back on July the 5th at the center there when we made the announcement. As a retired police officer, I have come across a lot of gun violence, a lot of domestics, and a lot of gun violence, and I understand what a gun can do to somebody. And it's not the gun itself, but it's a person that pulls the trigger that causes the gun to go off. But, Mr. Price, our government announcement on Bill C-21, you stated that most Canadians want more gun control measures, as well as community resources devoted to addressing the root cause of gun violence, and more action taken to control guns at the border. You then said the reasons we support the announcement of Bill C-21 is that it is a combination of all those things. Could you elaborate on your position and why you believe we are taking the right steps to make our community safer?
Thank you, and thank you again for the other questions in the committee. I think as we're working through this, and I want to say as well that there are, one of the victims affected, their father's a retired police officer. We have that influence in terms of our thinking. I would say again, it's not going to be about one thing. Here's the thing: we want to be a country that is very heavily armed relative to other countries in the world. That is the fact. We have a lot of guns out there, and maybe there's lots of good reasons for that, and maybe there's lots of reasons related to recreation for that. But now it's going to come time to pay the bill. So we're going to have to step up and do those things. We're going to have to fund the programs that require prevention. We're going to have to fund those programs that talk about a more intense consequences for stepping outside of that. We're going to have to fund the program that says we should take those very much most dangerous guns out of here. They never should have been here in the first place. There should have been more oversight all the way along through successive governments of various stripes. So now comes time to pay that bill, because gun violence is continuing to grow. We're letting more and more guns in, and if we don't do anything, and it is naive to sit here and say that supply does not have some kind of impact. It's a supply and demand marketplace, just like anything else. And a more ready supply has got to be part of the issue. But it's all of those things, sir. It's not one that we have never said it's just about banning handguns. It's about a number of things, and that's what we hope the committee will conclude, and will step up and make the recommendation and push this government to put in place the regulations, resources that will give this Bill C-21 to make it effective for all of our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Chair, I cede the remaining of my time to Ms. Demoff.
Ms. Demoff, go ahead. A minute 50.
Mr. Wilson, you're a for-profit corporation, are you not? So that disqualifies you for a number of government programs. The funding for the gang prevention strategy has gone through municipalities, so that actually goes through the City of Toronto. I would suspect you're disqualified from that as well because you're for-profit, right?
Correct.
So do you receive funding from the Canadian Coalition, or have you ever, Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights?
We have received a donation of $6,000 2 years ago. Yes, we have.
Okay. Mr. Price, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more. We've had a lot of pressure from the sports shooters, as Mr. McGregor alluded to. And if I run out of time, maybe you can provide it to us all in writing, but why should we not be expanding that definition? Because they've been quite vocal, and I'm just wondering if you could give us some information on that.
Well, I guess there is an exemption for sports shooting. I think, we look at the Olympic program, and it's very tightly tied with respect to the kinds of guns that are used. They're very specific. And so, this is all going to be about risk management. So the risk of those guns turning into crime guns is probably lower. If we look at something like IPSC on the other side, it's a very broad definition. There are 5 categories of handguns that are including open, which basically means anything. So in terms of as a control measure, to be able to say, well, that kind of gun should be used or not, or there's a risk that the number of those guns grows because suddenly I'm an IPSC elite shooter, we're just very skeptical that that could be managed, and we think it undermines an objective we have. Look, we know this is not going to be easy, and it's going to disappoint some people, but, on the other hand, we've been victims of gun violence. We're the examples of what happens when it goes wrong, and it's obvious why we're coming through with this motivation. We're asking that somebody give something up to make sure that we have safer streets. The guy on the Danforth is not a gang member. Richard Edwin from Toronto in the spring, was an RPAL holder, so this perfect vetting process, it does not exist. It can't possibly understand the motivation of everyone that successfully gets through the RPAL process, or that they might change their mind or change their behavior. He accumulated a cache of weapons and started shooting people at random in the downtown core of Toronto. These risks happen. They happen in addition to the other kinds of crimes that we see that are the product of crime guns. So we've got to solve the whole problem, or we'll be sitting here again, and you'll have other sad people standing here making the same testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We go now to Madame Michaud. Madame Michaud, allez-y.
Please go ahead, Ms. Michaud. 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Well, thank you for your personal testimony, Mr. Wilson. It's quite appreciated. And you spoke elegantly about the problem of illegal weapons. We're all fully aware that smuggling and trafficking of weapons illegally is a scourge. But I'd like to understand your particular stance on Bill C-21. Does it go far enough in your opinion? Does it go too far? It's my understanding also that your organisation was funded by a firearms lobby, which is quite a well-known one for that matter, and that association stands up for very specific positions on certain issues, that they're always law-abiding firearms owners that are affected by this kind of legislation. But the proof is in the pudding with the witnesses here today before us that there are legal firearms owners that have committed crimes, and this is undeniable. So do you endorse the positions of that organisation that you collaborate with financially, or do you believe that there needs to be further legislation on legal weapons and lawful ones?
First portion of the question. Our stance on C-21, and if it doesn't go far enough, or if it does, I'll use the state of New York as an example. May 24th, 10 black people, people of my culture, were murdered by a white supremacist. A state that has one of the most rigorous gun laws in the U.S., red flag laws included. This was not prevented by either these gun laws or the red flag. So I'll emphasize again and say that I believe if there was intervention or prevention for this young, unhealthy man who committed this egregious act, let's say by somebody like Mr. Bradley Galloway, who is a former neo-Nazi here in Canada, and does some fantastic work on keeping Canadians safe and preventing and pulling guys out of that world. I believe if someone like him would have got to that shooter, that would have been the right measures to take. Addressing funding. To us, death and murder in Canada is not a partisan issue. It's not a political issue, really, the way it should be. It's a Canadian issue, something that we all should care about. So when there are people out there that can agree with our struggle or see the work that we're doing and appreciate it, we greatly and strongly appreciate in return. So regardless of what organization has ever written us a check, we greatly appreciate that they see the work that we're doing and are there to support it, regardless of what their political stances are and who they are.
Merci. We go now to Mr. McGregor for the final slot. 2 minutes and a half, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilson, I would like to continue with you. And you've heard clearly that there is a very real concern out in there about domestic diversion of legal handguns. And I think that the intention overall of C-21 is to try and limit the number of legal handguns in circulation. I think that you've concentrated very much on trying to make sure that it's not just the supply, but also the demand. That you want to go after the demand. But if there is a great big supply out there, there is always a chance that some can be stolen and used in a crime. Like, do you have any opinions on the sport shooting discipline aspect of it? I mean, I'm trying to find a way where people in my neck of the woods who love the sport shooting, can in some way continue to do what they can, but also take into account the very real concerns that have been listed by the Danforth families. Do you have any opinions on how we may be able to strike a middle ground on this very delicate question that's before our committee?
Well, I think education is key here. I myself don't understand the nuances of sport shooting and whatnot, but I'm all for people doing things that they enjoy. I don't think maybe things are being taken into consideration that people having those outlets may be something that reduces stress and is conducive to mental health, and would keep them from maybe becoming an angry person. But I think education, as far as people working together and kind of understanding each other's position and finding a common ground. Not everybody who wants or owns a gun is a bad person, and not everybody who is not for firearms is a bad person. What I think is happening here is there is a lot of political gesturing happening where people who may have shared similar experiences don't have the chance to work together and don't have the chance to make a difference together because they're being pulled in one direction or another. So how I think it would help most is if we kind of took away the partisanship on this one particular issue and focused on the real things that are affecting the majority of people. For instance, you know, I know Ken and Claire, and we've spoken at a lot of different things together, and I can definitely relate, especially on a trauma level. And one conversations that we've had in the past have been, and they know that I know how they feel, but in their case, you know, this was an anomaly. Ken has admitted that prior to this event, there was no real knowledge or interest in gun violence in Canada because it wasn't something that affected them. Where in my case, this is something that I grew up with and lived with. For instance, my assistant here.
I'm sorry, sir. We're going to have to
Samantha-
cut you off here.
Sorry.
Mr. McGregor's time is well past up. So that brings this panel to a close. I'd like to thank you all for helping us with our inquiry and for your time today and sharing with us your experience and your knowledge. And with that, we will suspend for 2 minutes and change panels. Thank you. In person, we have, as an individual, Mr. Solomon Friedman, criminal defense lawyer. Welcome. And by video conference, we have from the Edmonton Police Service, we have Chief Dale McPhee, Chief of Police. We have from the Vancouver Police Department, we have Inspector Michael Rowe. Welcome to you all. And we will start with up to a 5-minute statement from each group. And we will start with Mr. Friedman. Please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, members. Thank you for inviting me to address you today. It's always a pleasure to appear before this committee, and particularly in person this time. In fact, since 2011, I have testified over a dozen times before this committee and others on proposed firearms legislation and regulation. In that same time, reflective of Parliament's consistently inconsistent push and pull approach to firearms legislation, the Annotated Firearms Act, the firearms law reference text which I co-author, has appeared in no less than 4 editions. Instead of applying an evidence-based, principled focus to lawmaking, governments have taken a piecemeal and haphazard approach, which has favored symbolism over substance and rhetoric over rational decision-making. While this might be good news for legal authors, publishers, and booksellers, it is decidedly bad news for law-abiding gun owners and Canadians generally. Bill C-21 is the latest extension of this trend. Given the time constraints which have been placed upon this committee's work, I will focus my attention on Bill C-21's proposed prohibition on the transfer of restricted firearms, that is handguns, to licensed private individuals, or more accurately, the deferred confiscation of 1 million lawfully owned restricted firearms, which were purchased legally, used and stored safely, and have never posed a risk to public safety. In my view, there are 3 fundamental problems with this provision. First, support for this measure comes from fundamentally bad data. Instead of addressing the core causes of handgun offenses, namely the factors that drive individuals into gang activity, like poverty, addiction, and marginalization, or even focusing on the true source of the vast majority of handguns used in criminal offenses, handguns smuggled into Canada from the United States, this bill targets the law-abiding, without making even the smallest dent in handgun crime. In February, I appeared before this committee to give testimony for your study on gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and street gangs. As I said then, good decision-making requires good data. I cited an example of bad data, which has been used to justify bad policy, and that is the oft-heard assertion that 70% of traceable crime guns have a domestic origin. This statistic is a good example of a number that is true, false, and misleading all at the same time. To start, this counts only those firearms that are traceable. It is therefore, by definition, a number which will skew towards domestic firearms, as those are much easier to trace. It doesn't count firearms with obliterated serial numbers or foreign firearms that cannot be traced. Next, the definition of crime gun further self-selects and obscures our focus. Crime guns generally refer to firearms, including, by the way, pellet guns and replica firearms, seized by police in the course of their duties. This includes both offense and public safety-related seizures. That definition does not differentiate between a handgun used in a gang shooting and 100 non-restricted, safely stored firearms which are seized from an elderly gun collector who is the subject of a police wellness check because his daughter has not heard from him in days. You can see now why that 70% number may be true on its face, but is really irrelevant to assessing what measures are necessary to address violent gun offenses. In fact, in your report, this committee agreed with the accuracy of my critique. Skewed and manipulated data can never be the basis for evidence-based policy. Canadians are entitled to legislation drafted on the basis of empirical data, not misinformation. The second fundamental problem with the legislation is that it is a distraction and a gross misdirection of policing and other justice sector resources which are in short supply and are desperately needed to address the core causes of crime. While criminal legislation looks free on its face, it does not require an upfront expenditure. Criminal defense lawyers know all too well the costs of increased criminalization and the ever-expanding criminal code. We as a group are not surprised as the justice system sags under the weight of well-intentioned amendments, and justice is delayed, denied, and charges are ultimately stayed by the courts. Finally, this legislation suffers from the fundamental flaw that is endemic to much of this government's criminal law reform. It is a solution in search of a problem. Like the hasty elimination of centuries-old procedural protections like peremptory challenges for juries or the preliminary inquiry, or case-specific responses to unpopular acquittals, which limit the rights of the accused to tender admissible evidence. These justice amendments bear the hallmarks of a government which legislates based on tweets and sound bites, without taking into account the real consequences, unintended or otherwise, of their criminal law policy. And this is certainly true of the deferred confiscation provisions of Bill C-21. Legally obtained handguns in the possession of law-abiding citizens are not and have never been a public safety problem. In 2019, Vancouver Police Chief Adam Palmer, head of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, explicitly rejected the public safety benefits of any such handgun ban, calling it, quote, naive to the realities of organized crime and smuggling. When Defence Counsel agrees with the policy position advanced by Canada's police chiefs, it is just one more indication that these provisions are not based in evidence or data, but are political in nature. And once again has been the case for each subsequent amendment to our firearms law, law-abiding Canadians, citizens who have complied with the law time and again, will pay the price. And worse yet, public confidence in our legislators inevitably erodes even further.
Could you wrap up, sir, quickly?
As it becomes crystal clear for all to see, substance once again takes a backseat to symbolism. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We'll go now to the Edmonton Police Service. Chief McPhee. Go ahead, Chief. 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to thank the parliamentary committees for allowing us to speak today about the significant safety concern relating to firearms. Also like to acknowledge real quick those families that have lost a loved one due to violence, in particular with firearms. Myself, I've been in police leadership for approximately 20 years, serving both as a police chief in 2 services, currently Edmonton as mentioned, and a former deputy minister of public safety. As a police service in Edmonton, most of our gun crime happens with handguns. We support any legislative tools and powers that might help enforce and prevent gun crime in Edmonton. Bill C-21 acknowledges that while law enforcement plays a crucial part, we must build society-wide capacity to find a balance between education, suppression, intervention, and prevention. Give you a bit of a local context. Over the last 2 years in Edmonton, like many other jurisdictions, we have seen an increase in illegal ownership of violence use of firearms. In 2022, we've taken 528 firearms off the street. Year to date, our officers have responded to 127 shootings, 50% resulted in injury, 85% considered targeted. In the same time frame in 2021, 125 shootings, 57% result in an injury, which had the potential for bystanders to be injured. Most of the violence remains targeted through provides little comfort to the communities who are often left reeling in the aftermath of gun violence happening in their backyards. We continue to work diligently to mitigate these crimes, but the gang and organized crime groups driving gun violence are growing more brazen and so disregard for the law, including the legislation we're discussing here today. Now, I want to break this into 2 parts. There's things that we support, and there's some things that we have some serious concern with, and I'll try to run through those real quickly. I'm encouraged by parts of Bill C-21 that strengthen our existing approach to firearms, the proposed implementation of new offenses, intensified border controls, and stronger penalties combat trafficking and smuggling, all beneficially deterring the criminal element. Provisions prohibit the import, export, and sale of replica firearms is also greatly appreciated. The use of replica firearms to commit crime is something that we see quite often in Edmonton. Now, while these are good first steps, we must have a balanced and impactful legislation. And I just want to go into, I have concerns, and certainly EPS has concerns about the logistics, resources, and long-term impacts of other portions of this proposal. Handgun freeze. A handgun freeze will reduce the number of handguns in circulation in the long run. That is the belief. In the short term, we expect that those wanting to acquire guns will find alternatives, increasing incidences of smuggling, 3D printing, and conversion of airsoft guns. This may also increase the commodity value and motivate individuals, including lawful firearms owners, to sell their handguns through illegal channels, knowing the restrictions drive up monetary value. Additionally, we share a border with one of the largest sources of handguns. A freeze would limit our ability to trace transactions originating within the U.S. and will be unable to locate a point of sale. We are told on a ban that the ban of handgun transfers resulted in an increase in handgun sales, with approximately 20,000 handguns purchased since the ban and 12,000 transfer applications still waiting to be processed. The red flag law, well, it's well tended. However, many of the proposed powers already exist under Section 117 of the Criminal Code. As it stands, the law would pose a significant draw on police resources should numerous applications be granted in a time where many Canadian police services are stretched thin. This could further increased service demands. Expanded license revocation. And a lawful firearms owner is no longer able to purchase handguns. They may not be motivated to renew their license. This may lead to an increasing number of expired licenses and individuals no longer authorized to possess handguns. There's already a backlog in enforcement in Alberta. There's already 3,700 revoked or expired PALs, possession acquisition license, some dating back to 20 years that aren't being enforced. The RCMP does not have the resources to enforce these expirations. To get a permit for a firearm is a lengthy process. These impacts the freeze, expands license revocation, mean that police may lose vital information of proactive service. The buyback program. Police service still waiting more information. The implementation of the buyback program, like other service, I should share concerns how it will impact police resources, and I'm not actually sure what the benefit might be. Not long ago, we had a large shooting event. I want to share a success story of just how this works. Multiple shooters in relation to a large crowd outside an individual, some deceased, some injured. Through the work that we did in relation to that, getting the firearm, finding the firearms, tracing the ammunition, we basically were able to trace this to a gun that came up through the U.S., did multiple shootings in another Canadian jurisdiction. As a result, we, in a very short period of time, had 4 people in custody, preventing further offenses. If we don't start investing in the Canadian system, and our ATF is a better partner than the Canadian system, particularly the Forensic Laboratory Service, this would have took us up to a year to actually solve. Steps to strengthen our current approach and investigative tools will bring us long-term change and meaningful. I heard it earlier today, focus on the people pulling the triggers and the motivation. We've had 3 of our 25 homicides this year to date have been the use of handguns. The reality, if we have somebody that's motivated to do this, I'm not sure when you look at the criminal element that the handgun freeze is going to solve that, but it is going to put a more strain on resources.
Sorry, Chief,
so I look
could you,
forward
wrap
to the
up?
questions. And just to end that, we had 528 guns seized today, and approximately 19% of those are handguns. So look forward to your questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chief. We go now to Inspector Rowe. We invite Inspector Rowe to make a statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee. I've been a police officer with the Vancouver Police Department for over 20 years now, and I've spent much of my career investigating violent crime, gang violence, organized crime, and firearms offenses. I've developed extensive experience conducting investigations and taking enforcement action against those people who use firearms to commit violence. I've seen firsthand the impact of firearms-related violence on communities across Canada, and have watched the proliferation of unlawfully possessed firearms, replica firearms, and prohibited devices such as high-capacity magazines and suppressors. To date, in 2022, there have been 16 shootings within the city of Vancouver. 8 of those have resulted in injuries or death, and 11 of those were identified as having a significant potential for the injury of innocent bystanders. During the same period, 62% of those shootings also had a nexus to gangs. During the same period, there's been 127 shootings across the Lower Mainland region of British Columbia, 74 of which have been identified as having a nexus to gangs. As we are all aware, firearm violence is not limited to the city of Vancouver. Police officers across Canada are seeing the very real impact that the unlawful possession of firearms, the use of firearms and imitation firearms to commit crimes has on public safety and communities across Canada. In recent years, I've witnessed the increasing proliferation of firearms. Lower cost and increased availability of firearms has resulted in people involved in lower level crimes not having access to firearms where they would not have had access in the past. An example of this is a street-level drug trafficker recently found in possession of a heavily modified ghost gun, privately made firearm, capable of fully automatic firing and equipped with a suppressor and a high-capacity magazine, something that we would not have seen at the start of my career. Bill C-21, based on my experience, I believe that the amendments set out in Bill C-21 reflect the need for a national approach to reducing firearm-related violence and will give police valuable tools to address firearms crime across Canada. I've testified here before about how easy it is to simply remove a rivet from a magazine to increase its capacity and the dangers that high-capacity magazines create for communities, the police, and offenders themselves. The new offense for altering a magazine will provide police officers with much-needed opportunities for enforcement and investigation. And the benefit of creating new offenses such as this is that police officers gain the ability to charge offenders and apply for judicial authorizations targeting specific offenses. Modernizing the legal definition of a replica firearm and placing controls on the importation, exportation, and sale of realistic-looking replicas will help police address the very real use of replica firearms in criminal offenses. Additionally, this amendment will help the police address the growing trend of altering realistic airsoft guns to fire live ammunition. Red flag laws will also allow citizens to access a judicially authorized process to restrict a person's access to firearms and provide police with the authority to search for and seize firearms, which will protect victims of domestic violence and those at risk of self-harm. An ongoing trend which I've identified and which I've identified and testified here about previously is the emergence of privately made firearms, commonly known as ghost guns. We're seeing more and more ghost guns in the lower mainland gang conflict on the west coast of Canada, specifically in the hands of people believed to be involved in active murder conspiracies and also those we believe are working as contracted, hired killers. Ghost guns can be 3D printed or created from modified replica firearms. Modern 3D printing materials produce a durable firearm capable of shooting hundreds of rounds without failure. One of my investigations in Vancouver located a sophisticated firearms manufacturing operation capable of producing 3D printed firearms, suppressors, and airsoft conversions. So in addition to those in addition to what's already included in Bill C-21, I would ask this committee to consider regulating the possession, sale, and importation of firearms parts used to manufacture ghost guns, such as barrels, slides, and triggers assemblies. These parts are currently lawful to purchase and possess without a license, and they can be purchased online or imported from the United States. The emergence of privately made firearms has reduced the significance of the currently regulated receiver and increased the importance of currently unregulated gun parts, which are needed to finish a 3D printed receiver and turn it into a functioning firearm. I would also support increased funding for specialized firearms enforcement teams to proactively target those offenders who import, manufacture, and traffic unlawfully possessed firearms. Finally, I would like to thank the committee for their ongoing work addressing the real threats that unlawfully possessed firearms create for our communities across Canada. And I ask that you continue to advocate for meaningful legal consequences for those people who make the decision to unlawfully pick up a firearm. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. We now go to start our rounds of questions with Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question to Chief McPhee, something that you said really struck out at me. To reiterate what you said, is it your opinion that some provisions in C-21 will actually could have a negative impact on public safety? You're on mute, sir. I hope that'll be reflected in my time. Thanks.
Got me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, and specifically in relation to the handguns, as stated, and we've heard several times, there's parts of this thing that have actually a lot of sense. But when we're going to actually ban handguns and not focusing on the people pulling the triggers on the enforcement model of some of the things currently existent.
But you agree that it could have a negative impact on public safety?
Absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
Man. Okay, thank you. I know that police have an important role to play in combating domestic violence. Bill C-21 proposes a so-called red flag law that would allow people to apply to the courts for an emergency weapons prohibition order. The police would be enforcing this order, is that correct?
Yet to be determined. That's
okay.
what we're under the understanding, but yet to be determined.
Thank you. Now, if a domestic abuse victim or someone concerned that a loved one is mentally ill or suicidal comes to the police with a concern over safety where there's a firearm present, do the police take immediate action, including seizing the firearms?
Yes.
If this legislation passes as is, would you, in your professional opinion, recommend that victims go through this new court process or that they contact police directly?
Again, that new court process that we're saying isn't real clear.
But, you know, if there's an emergency situation, should people go to the courts or should they go to the police?
The police. If you're talking about that, absolutely the police.
Do you think that because of the delays that we've seen in the court system, that someone seeking an emergency weapons prohibition order from the court, instead of calling the police immediately in an emergency, is actually putting themselves and possibly others in more danger?
Again, that would be a hypothetical answer, but the possibility does exist.
Do you think that the red flag laws in this legislation are necessary, or are police already enforcing red flag laws in this country?
As mentioned, there's 117.2 of the criminal code. This strengthens that, but I haven't seen exactly how many times across this country 117.2 has been used today.
Is there any truth to the claim that some people have made that this legislation is necessary to add the courts because police are ignoring the requests of victims?
I have never seen a police service, and you heard it as well from the inspector in BC. This firearms is something that we all take very, very serious, regardless of a handgun or any type of firearm, replica or not. That's a very serious offense that all police services that I'm aware of take action on.
So you don't have any evidence that the police are not currently doing their job enforcing red flag laws?
Correctly, we could do more of it. Again, it goes down to, obviously, as the inspector also mentioned, resources.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman, a key justification for C-21 is to prevent the so-called practice of straw purchasing. Is straw purchasing a widespread practice in this country?
I can tell you, particularly when it comes to handguns which are registered to the licensed owner, it's legal suicide for somebody to buy handguns to divert them to the legal market. They are tied to them both by serial number and registration certificate. And that's why in the homicide and shooting cases that I've done, my colleagues do, police investigate, particularly in the city of Ottawa, but elsewhere, we see illegally smuggled guns into the country as being those handguns which are used in violent crimes.
Do you believe that the current practices that regulate handguns in this country are effective at preventing and deterring straw purchases?
The proof is in the pudding, right? Like I said, it would take a very foolish individual, not just foolish, but once again, who wants to spend years and years in the penitentiary, to sign themselves up to a list, put their name on a government database, and then go and commit a crime which is linked to that database.
Will the prohibition of handgun transfers under C-21 do anything to prevent the purchase, possession, and use of handguns for illegal purposes?
The only thing that it will do, and I echo Chief McPhee, I think it's a really important perspective that's being lost here, is it will alienate 2.2 million law-abiding Canadians who were told, license, register your firearms, and you will be able to own them safely and lawfully. Instead, we're going to see less compliance with licensing and a general mistrust driving a wedge between law-abiding citizens and law enforcement who should be close partners in cooperation. So not only will it do nothing because law-abiding citizens and legally owned handguns aren't the problem here, but it could actually jeopardize public safety. And I'm very happy the police are here to give that perspective.
Thank you. C-21 also makes it an offense to alter a magazine to exceed the legal limit of bullets. We all know that it is currently illegal to own a magazine that exceeds the amount of legal bullets. Can you, as a lawyer, explain the ridiculousness of this proposal? Yeah, and I listened closely to what Inspector Rowe had to say, and it's an interesting perspective. I guess there are competing points of view here. As a criminal defense lawyer, I'm of the view that if something's illegal once, it doesn't have to be illegal twice, 3 or 4 times. It's a crime to possess a prohibited device. A magazine that holds more than the legally permitted number of rounds is a prohibited device. And if people aren't deterred from committing one crime, they're not going to be deterred from committing 2, 3, 4, or 5 crimes. So to me, watching the criminal code get thicker and thicker by the year and not actually addressing the reasons why someone might commit this offense or giving the police the resources to investigate these serious offenses is a real concern. I'd say this, if those offenses do not already form the provisions whereon, as Inspector Rowe said, police can seek authorizations, whether they're search warrants or wiretaps, that's a good place to start. Creating brand new offenses that target existing illegal conduct, to me, seems like a waste of time and energy. Do you agree with Chief McPhee's assessment on the red flag provisions in C-21? Yes or no?
Yes, I think it's an important point that police already take a very active stance when they get public safety complaints about firearms. The concern is that the courts will be flooded with people where their complaints have been investigated by the police and found to be meritless. We don't need more backlog in our courts when the police are already taking extensive enforcement action on firearms public safety concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Nur Mohammed, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to the witnesses for being here, particularly Chief McPhee and Inspector Rowe. It's good to see you again. We've heard a lot of rhetoric and sort of very political statements, and I think I'd like to just be able to get to the facts of trying to get this legislation to be even better than it is, I think. And I'd like to start with with Inspector Rowe. You know, you had come before this committee once before. We'd spoken about ghost guns, and you've touched on ghost guns again today. One of the things that I'd really like for us to spend a little bit of time on and to get your perspective on is how can we, or what should this legislation do in respect of ghost guns, particularly as it relates to component parts that you rightly mentioned can be brought in or traded or bought without permit right now. How do you think we should build this into the legislation specifically, and what would you like for us to be able to go from this meeting and do?
Thank you very much for the question, sir. And I think the key message that we're getting from all of the myself and my fellow panelists here is that the key issue we're trying to target is legal firearms. And while illegally smuggled firearms, particularly from the United States, are a significant issue, a very growing issue that we're seeing out here is the manufacture of firearms, is a creation of privately made firearms and ghost guns, particularly amongst those people who are using them to commit violence. Like we're seeing them in the hands of the hitmen who are actually out there, working to cause violence and take lives. Now, the receiver, which is currently the regulated part, is that was considered to be the key component of a firearm. Unfortunately, 3D printing has made that very outdated now. That is an easily manufactured component and is easily replaced on and on. The key components now are the final pieces that you need to make that receiver an actual functioning firearm, such as barrels, slides, trigger assemblies, those type of components. Now, while those can also be manufactured, I believe that requiring a PAL, integrating the purchase, possession, sale, importation of these particular components into the current licensing system would go a long way to preventing the proliferation of privately made firearms within our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. I mean, Inspector Rowe, there are going to be people that say, "Oh, you know what? This is just making is adding red tape to the process, and just we should be diverting our attention elsewhere." What would you say to those people, having seen what you have seen in Vancouver, having seen what you have seen in the manufacture of these weapons and the need for these parts to be regulated? What would you say to folks that say that this is not important?
I would suggest to them that it's extremely important, and this is only going to grow. Our firearms laws need to grow and develop and modernize, just like the firearms and the firearms manufacturing are modernizing. Right now, we are regulating a part that can be produced within minutes on a 3D printer that can be produced in such quality that it's virtually indistinguishable from the actual manufactured part. And really, I do respect the need of a lawful gun owner to want to replace their barrel, want to upgrade their trigger, want to replace those components on their lawfully possessed firearm. And fair enough, they can use the same license that they utilize to purchase that firearm to purchase those components. But what that would do is that would help us restrict the number and amount of these components that are coming into our country, particularly once again via mail order, via online purchase from the United States, that are going into purchasing these or going into manufacturing these privately made firearms that are being used to commit violence.
Well, let's specifically turn, Inspector Rowe, to the issue of being able to mail order these component parts. What are specific measures you'd like to see in this legislation to help ensure that that is something that is stopped or at least hindered substantially, so as to limit the number of limit the access folks have to finding the parts they need to be able to build these ghost guns?
Naturally, it needs to be a wholesome kind of a broad approach. I mean, having some regulations or prohibitions on the importation of firearms parts. Regulating the importation of firearms parts is key, as well as an educational program educating people on why these firearms parts why the importation of these firearms parts, why the sale and possession of these firearms parts is being regulated, and then also providing our border services and providing our partners at the RCMP and other municipal police agencies with the tools and the firearms enforcement teams required to go out, conduct the investigations to dissuade and disrupt these parts from coming into our country.
Thank you, Inspector. I'd like to turn our attention now to the consequences of legal firearms and suicides. We had a number of physicians testify before this committee earlier this week, and they talked about the impact of guns in homes, legal weapons, access to legal weapons, and suicides, and the impact that it had on them as medical professionals based on what they saw, and also the impact that easy access to legal firearms in homes had in respect of people being able to take their lives. As a police officer, can you share your perspectives on what you and VPD and other law enforcement have seen in terms of access to legal weapons and suicides, and the impact that it has not just on families but also on police service?
I mean, I very much sympathize with those witnesses because I too have had direct personal experience regarding, suicides and firearms and their use, and it's tragic. And mental health disorders, and all of the different factors that would lead a person to take their own life using a firearm, all require as much attention and funding as we can possibly give them. I think that as the chief mentioned, sections of 117 under our criminal code and potentially these new red flag or yellow flag laws could allow us tools for people to step forward, maybe even medical professionals to step forward, identify when somebody who is a legal firearms owner is potentially experiencing a mental health crisis, and we would not only be able to limit their access to their lawfully owned firearms, but also hopefully be able to provide them with the support they need so that they are able to recover from that mental health crisis without it getting to the point of suicide.
Thank you, Inspector.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mohammed. On y va maintenant, Madame.
We'll proceed with Ms. Michaud. 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Friedman, I'll allow you to put your earpiece in. I'll be asking my questions in French, and I appreciate your opening remarks. Your position seems to be quite clear. Interpretation, testing, 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation service. Testing, 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation service. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation service. Testing. Can we please start the clock again, Mr. Chair? Thank you very much. Most appreciated. Now, I was saying in your opening remarks, Mr. Friedman, your position seems to be quite clear. I was reading an article in the Global News from in June where you said that you were against the red flag system that the Liberal government brought in. And I'll quote in English.
The proposed red flag law from the Liberals could be taken advantage of by bad actors and lead to swatting, where law enforcement is called on an individual for illegitimate reason.
And what I find interesting in that position is that we often hear advocates of firearms say, oh, well, the Liberals and those who want to legislate don't understand because there already exists a red flag system. You just have to look at the criminal code, for example, and what's happening on the ground. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call the Canadian Firearms Program to report a suspicious individual. So I'd like to understand your stance on that. What are you afraid of exactly when it comes to what's being proposed under Bill C-21 in relation to the red flag law?
Thank you very much for that question. It's an excellent question. It's an important issue. So I echo much of what Chief McPhee said about this mechanism, which is it is right now unknown exactly who is going to enforce it. So I'll say I have two primary concerns. The first one is access to the courts. Access to justice is an enormous problem right now. And I can tell you, I spent the past 2 days, as I do many days, litigating at our Ontario Court of Justice. And we are waiting 12 to 18 months for a trial in those courts. And the reason for that is because our judges and justices of the peace are at capacity. And what we're doing here is we're inviting, by cutting out that screening mechanism of police investigation, essentially people to flood the courts. And they're almost all going to be self-represented individuals, which pose all sorts of other challenges. And that's not where they should be going. Where they should be going is the police. because under Section 117 of the Criminal Code, the police have authority to act immediately, with or without a warrant, when there is a genuine concern to public safety. So that's very important. The police do not, if there exist exigent circumstances and a pressing public safety concern, the police don't need to go to a judge. And that's exactly how it should be, because when it comes to a potential firearm safety threat, the police should act first and then ask questions later. That already happens. So who is going to be using this mechanism? Number one, people who have gone to the police, where the police have done even the most preliminary investigation and deemed it meritless. In other words, they've deemed that there's some personal vendetta at stake here, or there's simply no public safety concern. That happens, I'd say, in the minority of cases. Those people would be able to go to the court, anonymously, interestingly enough, and then engage very scarce justice system resources. So that's an enormous concern, because you're basically creating a funnel where the only people who are going to take access to who are going to access that are people who have been denied by the police. And they've been denied by the police because the police take their jobs very seriously. I would be very, very curious to see any data whatsoever that supports the contention that individuals have gone to police with a public safety concern with respect to firearms and were ignored. I can tell you this, in almost 15 years of practice, I've never seen that. And I'd say this as a defense lawyer, with respect to Chief McPhee and Inspector Rowe, far more overzealous police enforcement than absolutely non-reactive. So it's, once again, it's a solution in search of a problem that is all it's going to do is clog up our resources, and it could present public safety dangers, because if Chief McPhee or Inspector Rowe's officers are told to enforce essentially a bogus complaint that they've already pre-screened, they need to send armed officers into that situation. They need to engage armed officers in a confrontation with a firearms owner who, because they've pre-screened the complaint, there's nothing wrong with, and that automatically creates real public safety concerns.
If I may, since I don't have much time, sir, so if I understand correctly, you're saying, and quite frankly speaking, I don't know if this is the case right now, but we should be able to rely on a police officer that might be called to a scene to help a potential victim, someone who's fearing for their life because someone's carrying a gun. The police officer might go to the scene, confiscate the weapon, even if it's been obtained legally. And as I said, I don't know even if a police officer is entitled to do that right now, but you're saying set aside justice for the time being and give the police officers this responsibility.
Well, it's not about setting aside justice. It's about the fact that the police have a statutory mandate to protect the public. And I can tell you this, as I'm sure our police witnesses today can, the moment the word firearms or firearm or gun or pistol is uttered on a 911 call or a complaint, it's not one police officer who's responding. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, and whoever are in the area, because police take those complaints extremely seriously. So, like I said, I'm an open-minded guy, as defense counsel. Occasionally we are. I'd love to see a shred of data that people are calling either the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program and reporting public safety concerns, or making those complaints to the police and they're being ignored when it comes to firearms public safety concerns. Once again, we're legislating this whole scheme. There's going to be new applications and forms and judges' times taken up when there is not an iota of evidence that there is any need that has to be filled here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, 30 seconds. Okie doke. So in your opening remarks, you referred to data that would be skewed the government relied on in introducing Bill C-21. What do you mean by that skewed data?
Well, those of you know even better than I do that you're going to have witnesses who are all credible and reliable, and they're going to come using the same data set and draw different conclusions from it. So data is very much in the eye of the beholder, but when it is used for explicit partisan purposes, that just can't be the basis of good criminal law decision-making, right? We require data, not anecdote, in order to pass criminal laws that have real criminal law consequences. So I gave the example of crime guns as one of the examples of that skewed data. It's a term that means whatever the party using it wants it to mean. Another one is when we talk about trends in violent crime, right? Whichever party wants there to be more violent crime will self-select a portion of that data and say, past 5 years, oh, we can see it's increasing. The trend, the party that doesn't want it will say, well, look, since the 70s, we've had a rapid decline in violent crime. So, for example, take handgun crime. It's a great example. And you can look at the last Stats Canada report. We see from 2009 until 2014.
Can you wrap up?
handgun crimes make up the same proportion of firearms violence offenses as they do from 2015 until 2020. So we talk about a rise. I'm very skeptical of the application of the data, not the underlying data itself.
Merci, madame. We go now to Mr. McGregor's. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Friedman, I'd also like to continue on the red flag law because this has received a lot of mixed feedback from many different sectors. And on May 16th, which I grant was before the current version of C21 was introduced, there was a letter to the Minister from several organizations, including the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, Women's Shelter Canada, Ending Violence Association of Canada, White Ribbon, the Canadian Labour Congress, quite a broad cross-section of Canadian society. And they said, I'll quote from the letter, shifting the onus of enforcement to women and third parties, as C21's red flag provisions attempt to do, is a guaranteed route to increased fatality. I guess just quickly your comment on that aspect, but I know like C21 is also trying to protect the identity of the complainant. And I guess if we don't need to add that to the criminal code, can you explain how do the police protect confidentiality of someone who might be in danger, right?
That's a great question. So remember, let's all focus on what we're trying to accomplish here with this law. We're trying to accomplish is that there is a public safety concern about someone who's in possession of firearms, legally or illegally, by the way. If there's a concern about someone who has illegal guns, this process can be followed as well. We want the police to take possession of reliable information and then take some enforcement, and what we really want is we want it to be preventative enforcement action. This provision is not about charging people for criminal offenses, it's about preventing harm, okay? So that's what we're all trying to accomplish. Right now, the system works as follows. If the police get information, and it can be a complaint, a call to them, and I agree, the notion of forcing the onus on women, other victims of violent crime, that they should go to the courthouse themselves and stand in front of a justice of the peace and plead their case in this application, to me is bananas, as someone who knows how the court system works, okay? But the police should be able to take that information, and if they have time, in other words, if it's not immediately an emergency, they can draft a warrant, or they go seize the guns and draft the warrant after. But in that warrant, and this is an important point about confidentiality, warrants are issued what are called ex parte. And I know we all hate Latin, but I'll give you a little bit of Latin lesson. That means without the other side present. And that makes sense. You don't want to tell the gun owner, lawful or not, hey, the police are coming to get your gun, so why don't you come to this court hearing? So that makes sense. Police are permitted to rely on confidential informants. Confidential informant privilege is the second highest protected privilege in this country after the privilege that I get, solicitor-client privilege, right? Although, once again, Inspector Rowe and Chief McPhee might disagree. They're pretty close there, right? Because we recognize that effective law enforcement requires confidential informants. So there are those provisions that exist already. And the police, once again, also have counsel that can advise them about these authorizations, giving, essentially directing victims of crime who are already traumatized and victimized, saying, go get your own self-help mechanism. You go to the court, right? It would be like requiring people to lay private criminal information when a crime has been committed. Does that exist? Yeah, it's 1 in a million that it happens. The police are taking this problem seriously, and they have effective enforcement tools.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So thank you for that. I do want to cover, I've only got just under 3 minutes left. So maybe to our police witnesses, I'll start with you, Chief McPhee. We've heard a lot of feedback from the airsoft community with respect to C21, and they are desperately trying to find a way to not only acknowledge the concerns that law enforcement have, but they're also trying to keep alive a sport that they're very passionate about and which many members enjoy playing. They've come up with suggestions such as requiring, minimum age of 18 to purchase airsoft, opaque carrying cases, maybe a type of licensing system. Do you have any feedback on what the airsoft community is suggesting to our committee as sort of a way forward that offers a compromise?
No, I haven't seen any of the airsoft feedback that you would have privilege to. Certainly, I can give evidence on what I was saying about in relation to tighter restrictions and regulations on this. We do see a lot of replica firearms used in a commission of an offense, and I mean, bottom line is they're treated as real firearms. So, without seeing that. And as Inspector Rose says, a lot of these can be converted. So to think of what the present suggestion is to what the concern is, I think I'm not sure if any police witnesses or anybody's actually had the chance to look at what
And
those
quickly,
suggestions were.
Inspector Rowe, I do want you to testify. But so this question's to you. You've talked about how airsoft guns can be converted to fire real ammunition. The airsoft community, I've gone and I've seen them play their game, and they pulled apart their airsoft rifle to show me the internal mechanisms. And they countered by saying that it would require someone with very specific knowledge and technical know-how to make that kind of conversion. So just to help our committee understand, I mean, when that conversion location was discovered, was it very technical knowledge to convert an airsoft rifle to fire real ammunition?
Thank you for the question, sir. And I would respectfully suggest that specific knowledge, technical abilities, and technical instructions are readily available on the internet to just about anyone nowadays. And with a small amount of practice and very easily accessible tools, people can conduct very, very complex and specific machining mechanisms on different firearms. I would suggest the best way for airsoft to save their sport, as you said, would be to move away from the extremely realistic looking and produced airsoft guns that we're seeing nowadays. As the chief just mentioned, it is virtually impossible to tell the difference between a high quality airsoft gun and its real counterpart. They are designed to look identical to existing real firearms, right down to the manufacturer's stamps on them. Some have some type of serialized number on it so that it appears to be a manufactured firearm. And that is a part of the culture, perhaps, of the sport, or something that people are looking for, and they need to move away from that. It's very easy to tell the difference between
I'm sorry, Inspector, I have to cut you off there.
Sorry,
thank you, Mr. McGregor. So we have a hard stop at 13 after, and by my timing, that's 6 minutes from now. So I'm going to ask everyone I'm going to give every party a minute and a half, and I'll have to be brutal about the time. So, Mr. Ruff, please go ahead, a minute and a half.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just a quick question to all the witnesses. Is an assault weapon a fully automatic firearm or a semi-automatic firearm?
In our Criminal Code and Firearms Act, there is no definition of the term assault weapon, and nor is there a generally accepted technical definition. In general, the term assault rifle, which is a technical term, not a legal term, refers to a select fire, light ammunition firing rifle that can fire both semi-automatic and fully automatic.
Fully automatic. And both for the chief and the inspector, would you agree with Mr. Friedman's definition?
I would suggest that I don't like to use that term to describe firearms.
Thank you. Chief?
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, definition is one thing, but the application is another.
Super. Look, I've been trying to get data on things around Bill C-21 and firearms legislation over the last 3 years with not very much luck. And so just for first you, Inspector Rowe, and then the chief, you've both given some statistics or some data. For you, Inspector, there you named a number of firearms crimes just recently. How many were done with a legal handgun?
Unfortunately, I don't have that data in front of me.
And why not?
Because quite honestly, I didn't ask for it in preparation for this.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. We go now to Mr. Shifke. A minute and a half, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Inspector Rowe and Chief McPhee, for addressing in your opening remarks the challenges associated with ghost guns. Recently in Montreal, just about a half an hour outside of my riding of Valois-Soulanges, we had a shooting where the individual was arrested, and the gun, the police believe, was one that he put together using parts purchased online as well as parts that were 3D printed. My question to you both is, are there any best practices that you can share with us that perhaps you've learned through your discussions with your counterparts nationally or internationally with regards to how we can tackle this? Is there something that's been proven to help tackle this issue? So I'll turn it over to you first, Inspector Rowe.
We've been working quite heavily. We are lucky in Vancouver. We have our own forensics firearms lab, and our forensic firearm lab here has been manufacturing ghost guns themselves to learn more about the manufacturing process and to help investigators identify such things as the tools needed, identify some of the jigs or even the waste byproducts, so that when we're out investigating, we're able to identify the exact items related to the manufacture of these ghost guns, and then utilize that to develop our grounds and continue our investigation, obtain judicial authorizations, that kind of thing. Once again, specialized firearms enforcement teams are what are required to address this problem. That's where the knowledge can be developed, where the subject matter expertise can be developed. We can develop excellent witnesses, and we can move forward and get successful prosecutions against people who are manufacturing firearms.
Chief McPhee, would you agree in just a couple seconds? Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Specialized enforcement. The other thing is we do have our own lab too. Plus, we have a really, really good relationship with the ATF. And you have to think ghost guns, that's where it started, as most things do. And as Inspector Rowe has, we don't see a lot of them, but we're seeing more and more. So anything that we can put in to obviously restrict or to put some things in relation to that, because right now they're not traceable. So we have to look at that a different way.
Thank you. We go now, Madame Michaud.
A minute and a half, Ms. Michaud. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I would have liked to ask everyone a question, but I have another question for you, Mr. Friedman. You seem to be against tighter firearms control, and quite openly so, when we think that military officers, police officers, whether it be a handgun or a different type of gun, they have to leave it at their police station and store it under very strict terms. Why would we allow civilians to have firearms, assault-style weapons and handguns at home? They're so dangerous. Why shouldn't they be secured at all times?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. First of all, I'm certainly not against tighter gun control laws. What I am against is laws that do nothing but criminalize otherwise law-abiding citizens. Firearms are dangerous and they need to be controlled and regulated. We're very proud to live in Canada, in a country where we have some of the strictest regulations and produce very positive public safety outcomes. What I am against is laws that have no empirical tie to public safety outcomes. So, you know, we live in a society with lots of dangerous regulated objects, and firearms are far from the leading weapon used in homicides. They're not even close. So if we're talking about regulating something, which, you know, we have decided that there ought to be a regulatory regime where people can own and use them safely, the onus is on the legislators to demonstrate that further restrictions will lead to positive public safety outcomes. And in my experience, my review of the data, having studied this and written on it and for the past 15 years, that's simply not the case. The legislators have failed at each turn to meet that burden.
Thank you. Thank you, Madame. Mr. McGregor, a minute and a half, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Friedman, I'd like to get your lawyer's perspective on the wording of Clause 1. You've heard the feedback from the police on their perspective on airsoft. So we're trying to find a way to... do you have any suggestions? Because right now, you know, it's going to basically deem these prohibited devices for certain parts of the criminal code. Do you have suggestions on the way forward where we can basically take into account police concerns, but also let the airsoft community continue their sport?
I wish I could give this answer in a minute and a half. And I'll tell you, I have the sincere dishonor of having lost this case at the Supreme Court of Canada, Her Majesty as she was then, and Christopher Dunn, which defined firearms in the context of airsoft and pellet guns. So it's an area that I'm far too familiar with. I'd be happy to give you my background materials on it. Yeah. To me, the issue is pinning down a definition of, number one, readily adaptable. Because a firearm, not the replica firearm, but the firearm definition itself has a sort of a clause that defines firearm, and then anything that's readily adaptable to be a firearm. And that is a gray area. So I hear what Inspector Rowe is saying, these can be, converted. If they can be readily adaptable, they are already illegal. And they're already firearms. So, but that's a real gray area. What does readily adaptable mean? So the Americans in the ATF, they use these 80% finished. They talk about certain tools and procedures that are used to complete firearms. So that's one place to focus. The second place is...
I have to pull
Sure.
a pin on that.
Mr. Chair, can you submit the brief to the committee on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a factum that was written on that subject that deals with the dangerousness of airsoft and pellet guns.
I appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, thank you all. And certainly to all our witnesses, thank you for your time today and for sharing with us your expertise and your experience and helping us in our study. And we are a little over, so I apologize to the committee staff and the interpreters for that. And with that, we are now adjourned.